Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome. We'll let everybody come on in from the waiting room. Thank you all for being here today, and we will get started here in just a moment. So I will. Okay. Well, good afternoon, everyone. Welcome. Thank you for being here today. Um, for those of you who don't know me, my name is Dr. Dustin Sachs. I am Chief Technologist, Senior Director of Programs here at the Cyber Risk Collaborative, and I'm really excited to be here today for our session, Demystifying Cyber Insurance, a strategic toolkit for CISOs navigating risk, coverage, and claims. And before we jump into this, and before we really talk a lot about what and share the resources we're going to share today, I really wanted to just introduce the community, introduce what the Cyber Risk Collaborative is, and really how we got to where we are today. So, the Cyber Risk Collaborative, our mission is to enable career development for current and future cyber leaders. And we do this through our vendor and analyst free environment. And what you're going to see today is really the results of that. We hold community conversations, we have community gatherings, we have live events, we have digital events, and we do task forces. And what task forces are, they are 6 to 8 to 12 week meetups weekly with a group of people who have brought forth a topic that is important to them, that they're struggling with, or that they want to discuss more about or learn from their peers more about. And all of this is really focused on the conversations and that peer collaboration and peer sourcing of ideas. What you're going to see today is the resource toolkit around cyber insurance, and this is really a byproduct of those conversations. It is the kind of tangible manifestation of those conversations. The idea as well of the community is to really increase organizational intelligence through the resources that we've got. All of our resources, again, for those who may not be familiar, are CISO developed, CISO driven, CISO guided resources. And again, the community exists to build a 24/7 real time access to top cybersecurity leaders, to your peers, to organizations like yours, to organizations that may be further along in the maturity process than you are, that are where you're heading. So it's really meant to be a collaborative opportunity for you to interface with like-minded individuals. We do this through a number of things. We do it through leadership development. We do it through workforce development. We do it through intelligence and insights. We do it through the tools and solutions, the CISO developed tools and solutions, peer collaboration, and of course, through personal brand building. One of the ways that we have looked at and that we have managed to develop by working with our CISO members is resource toolkits. And these are topic specific, curated groupings of resources that have been developed by our community, to help security teams do the job of security better. Not just guidance documents, not just resources, not just the things that say this is how you should do things, but here are the tools to actually help you do it. And today we'll talk about the cyber toolkit, the CISO toolkit around cyber insurance. If you're interested in learning more about our various toolkits, there's a URL that you can use to get to a spreadsheet that shows the resource toolkits, and most importantly, shows the estimated cost savings of just creating these resources, just developing the resources that are in here. So with that, without further ado, I want to welcome our members, our guests, our premium members, and I want to introduce our panel. We've got a powerhouse panel today. I'm going to introduce them, and then I'll give them a chance to give a little bit more of an introduction of themselves. First, we're joined by Michelle Amonte, who is Senior Cybersecurity Analyst for DuPage County, Illinois, and was part of and is here representing the task force that met on cyber insurance. We've got Ed Covert, who is the VP of Advisory Services for Conversant Group. Previously, he was with Bowhead Specialty and focused on risk management and some of the kind of concepts that we're going to talk about today. And of course, Steve Zolewski, former CISO for Levi Strauss and Company, and a very avid and involved member of our cyber community. And then, of course, myself here from this representing the Cyber Risk Collaborative and the community. So, Michelle, you want to introduce yourself further to the audience?
Sure. Thanks, Dustin. I've been with DuPage County for over 10 years now, most of that in some kind of cyber capacity. I've worked on both the technical and policy sides of cybersecurity in local government, including insurance. So I'm really excited about the products that we have created. Thanks.
Yeah, and I'll start off certainly by making sure to thank the entire uh, group that got together and talked about this. We had some really interesting, really insightful, and really fun conversations about cybersecurity and about uh, cyber insurance that I'm sure will come up today. Ed, for those who may not know who you are, first of all, shame on them, but please, feel free to introduce yourself.
I appreciate that. Thank you. Good morning, because it's still morning here in Los Angeles. My name is Ed Covert. I am, as Dustin said, VP of Advisory Services at Conversant, but that's a relatively newer role. Prior to that, I worked as the head of cyber risk engineering and was CISO for a period of time for Bowhead Specialty, which is an insurance carrier based out of New York, and I helped them set up their cyber insurance program. So how we would evaluate companies that wanted cyber insurance. So.
And thank you so much, Ed, for being here and being a valuable member as well of the community, and being involved in our LA community as well. Um, and then, of course, the man who needs no introduction, Steve. Would you like to introduce yourself to everybody?
That was really good. Wait. So, hey, I know some of you, but really a pleasure to be here today. Steve Zalewski, longtime cybersecurity practitioner. Most folks know me when I was at Levi Strauss. Yes, I'm actually wearing Levi's jeans right now. Okay, so just put that out of the way. And for the last 3 years, I've been a very active advisor. So I started an advisory practice, and I do a lot of mentoring and fractional CISO and working with security startups.
So what I hear you saying, Steve, is that people would be very there could we could start a real firestorm if I show the picture of you in Wranglers from last week.
Uh, yeah, let's not do that. You promised, okay? I said I would get you.
You're right. I did promise I wouldn't
I
share
thought
that
the
picture.
scotch arrived already, okay? Jeez Louise. Okay.
Sorry. Yeah, sorry about that. There's no picture, guys. No picture whatsoever.
No picture, that's right. None whatsoever.
These are not the droids you're looking for. I want to start off as well by telling everybody if you've got questions, if you've got conversation you want to have, please use the chat. Please feel free to submit your questions. We will have time at the end for questions. If you want to come off mute, we'll allow people to come off mute and ask questions. But really, really excited to talk through this today. So as we start, I really want to start, Michelle, with you and give us a little bit of background. So you were involved, I know, in the cyber insurance task force that we had. What is it, give people a little bit of an insight into why you got involved in the cyber insurance task force. What was the experience like? What did you take away most from that experience? What are the things that maybe you would share with others who might be considering getting involved in future task forces or who may not be familiar with task forces?
Sure. So I joined because Well, you asked nicely, and I said sure. But no, actually, being government, it's a little bit different for us compared to a lot of other people. So I thought, that I would be able to bring kind of a unique viewpoint to the group. And I would also be able to get others' viewpoints as well. Because anything that we can do a little more efficiently, I'm 100%, in for. Um, the products that came out of this, I'm really excited for everybody to see them because I think it's a very comprehensive group of tools that we do have, and I think a lot of people really find them useful.
Absolutely. And the tools that Michelle is talking about, for those of you who are part of our accelerator, our CRC Plus, our premium community, those are located now in the member portal under resource toolkits. When you go under resource toolkits, you will see that we are really excited to release today the 20th of our toolkits on cyber insurance, and you can click on that. You'll have all of the resources available for you as of today. And we'll talk through many of these resources throughout the conversation. But to start off with, Steve, you and I talked about this a lot in our kind of prep, but set the stage for everybody as to why cyber insurance is such an important area that CISOs need to focus on, and how that relates to the larger strategy of cybersecurity.
Sure. And you want me to do it in 2 sentences, right? Because that's obviously. Here's how I would characterize this, okay? Cyber insurance and this whole thing used to be a get out of jail free card for all of us, right? You bought cyber insurance and it covered everything. And cyber insurance now is like buying flood insurance in Florida, okay? It's possible, you can get it, but you really need to understand, right, why you need it and what you do with your program to manage the cost and to set the expectations for the family, your business, as to what you get from it. That's the fundamental shift I see with regards to the insurance product itself. Given that, now it becomes more important than ever for you as a practitioner to understand what value proposition you're bringing to your company. Meaning, how do you, as the CISO, characterize what your responsibility is to the company to then understand the risks, to back that into whether insurance is appropriate and what that is. And when I talked to Dustin, I said, okay, for everybody in this call, you are now the CISO of Levi Strauss. Congratulations. That's what happens when you don't go to a meeting. Now, the board says, are we secure? You, I would argue, have to think about it this way. Do you see your responsibility to the board and the company as, how must I secure Levi Strauss against attack? Or are you approaching it as, how should I protect the business of Levi Strauss? Or is your perspective, how do I enable the selling of more jeans for Levi Strauss? Now, if I ask it that way, which one of those questions is the one that you think best reflects how you view the value of cybersecurity to the company? Right? Now think about that. Am I here to secure the company? Am I here to protect the business? Or am I here to enable the business? That I start with as foundationally, where are you coming from to be able to then build the business value proposition for purchasing cybersecurity and what it is that it's going to accomplish for you.
And I think what's important as well in the example that you gave is not only what do you think, but as you and I talked about, what does the business think the answer is? Because as I know, and as I know you've said before, and I've heard you say this before, the business's view was Steve, you're just here to sell jeans, sell more jeans, sell more jeans. Like that's what we're here for. So, understanding what your view is versus what the business is and where there might be disconnect is important. Ed, as somebody who's both, sat in the CISO chair, but also been at an organization where risk management is a very, key element of what you do. What are some of those areas, some of the challenges, some of the overlooked portions of the cyber insurance or of the risk management process that CISOs that you kind of look at and go, if you're in that chair, you've really got to be focusing on this.
Well, I think to Steve's point, right? This function anymore is not necessarily the uber technical position that it's always been made out to be. It is a business job. I'll tell anybody, I'll scream it from the mountaintops that security serves a business purpose. If it doesn't, then we don't need it. So the CISO needs to understand how they enable the business, or in Steve's case, sell more jeans, how the business sell more jeans. So that understanding of risk is more important in my mind than just threat, likelihood, vulnerability, and impact. It's that understanding of, if this event A happens, and what's the probability of event A happening first off, but let's assume the probability is 80%. I'm going to lose this dollar figure. That's a business decision now. And so now you can start having those conversations around, risk and transference of risk, which is all insurance is.
Right. And I think, there's so much to be said about communicating and the way in which you communicate risk, the way you communicate concepts. Michelle, one of the things that I know got talked about very early on in the task force was this idea of the lexicon that we use and the terms that we use and the definitions of those terms. Talk a little bit about what the conversation that was had around, how terms get used, and the understanding that organizations have from organization to organization about what the various terms that are part of the cyber insurance process, what role those play.
That's a good point. I think that, especially with our cyber insurance, because it does hit so many departments, obviously it's going to be procurement, it's going to be IT, it's going to be, for us, Homeland Security, um, all those different departments. Those terms can always mean something different to other people, to everybody. So especially, with IT, they look at things a very specific way. They look at terms a very specific way. Procurement's going to look at a completely different set of terms. I've seen it myself to where those terms don't necessarily translate very well, unless you specify the actual definition of those.
Yeah, and I know one of the things that the task force really spent of time around and built, one of the very first things was this kind of idea of having a common glossary. And I know, we talked a lot about the various different terms, things like, what does a business interruption really mean? What does, data breach really mean? What do, so how valuable is it? And I'll open this to the entire panel. How valuable is it to have a common set of terms and definitions when you're communicating risk or communicating concepts around cyber insurance?
I'll go and jump in on this one, because
Please.
let's start with the basic idea of risk, right? To risk, to us, to cyber practitioners, professionals, means a certain thing. That term means something completely different in the insurance business. So just having a common definition of what the thing you're actually talking about means something, and it's important, I think. So it sort of lays the foundation for any other future discussion you want to have.
Absolutely. Steve, Michelle, any thoughts, anything to add? Any thoughts from your standpoint of the importance of that, like common lexicon, that common language, when you're discussing this topic?
Yeah. So If we approach risk as cybersecurity practitioners, thinking that we're going to teach the business what cybersecurity risk is, versus us thinking doing a business impact analysis and looking at how the business views business risk for generating revenue, you better get your head right on which way you're approaching that problem. Because the technologists and the tool jockeys and the technical CISOs who think that cybersecurity is so important that they're obligated to teach everybody why it's important has been a 20-year journey that has not resulted in the outcome that we had hoped. And so a lot of the transition in cyber insurance is reflecting this appreciation that cybersecurity is not about technical controls. It's about managing business risk where cybersecurity can have a key impact in an outage to the revenue or to the brand of the company. And that transition and appreciation for the common lexicon, I think, is a lot of what this conversation is about.
Absolutely. So, um, Michelle, coming back to you, one of the things that I know after we kind of talked about that kind of common lexicon, we started there was a lot of discussion that was had about the types of information and the way in which you're kind of approaching the cyber insurance process, the types of questions that are asked, the types of things that you have to, types of evidence. What are some of the challenges you've seen and some of the challenges? I know you shared a couple of things and a couple of even wins where sharing and question was asked and you were able to show some benefit, but talk a little bit about, and I know we created, and I'll share on screen here in a moment, a little bit about the questionnaire tracker that we had, and some of the tracking documents, because the number of questions that are out there and the evidence you have to put together. But talk a little bit about the conversation that was had, and your experience around the various questions that are asked and the information that's required.
Sure. So, our insurance questionnaires are fairly robust. They always want quite a lot of information. Just because we're subject to HIPAA and CGIS and PCI. So it encompasses all of that. And then along that route, sometimes they have requirements for us that we have to meet. One of the examples that I had brought up was, they requested us to have a certain number of global admins, which was it's kind of one of those where you don't want them to tell you what to do. I know a lot of people are like, they can't tell me what to do, but on the flip side of that, and this is overly optimistic, on the flip side of that, their suggestions are good practice. They want to keep you safer because it's in their best interest that that you don't get attacked, that you don't have to file a claim. So we do use it as a definitely as a cooperative opportunity. Like, they're in it for the money, obviously, but they also don't want to pay out. We don't want to get breached because then that's a whole other thing. It looks bad for us. It looks bad for our constituents. But it's some of the tools and stuff that they give us too are I found very handy. We have like training resources that we have some of our people take. They do scanning, it's included. So I'm overly optimistic with our insurance company. I know that, but at the same time, they have been a good collaborative partner as well.
So, thank you for that, Ed. Talk how important and what are the ways that and the things that organizations should be thinking about from an evidence collection, evidence organization. That one of the things that I know, and Michelle can back up, that we talked about was this idea that, to some extent, when you're going through the cyber insurance process, you almost treat it like getting pulled over by a cop. You want to tell them as little as possible to get them to not give you the ticket, or to, get them to get the outcome you want. but talk a little bit about the importance of, or how organizations should be approaching the kind of process of getting all the evidence together, making sure that they're answering the questions, making sure that they're consistent.
Well, I think it depends on the organization, but you should definitely have a point person, right? For us, it was our, and when I was filling out the application, as opposed to when I was collecting information on other people. So I got to differentiate that. Filling it out as, as the CISO was, we had a point, it was a CIO who was the point person, but then it was a collaborative effort. And so we would go through, we'd break up the questions. Um, General counsel was involved. It was a whole thing. In terms of gathering evidence, I can honestly say I never asked for evidence unless I found something that was, I was never asking for evidence when I was evaluating programs in the first pass. Okay. So I'll give you an example. To Michelle's point, we would also do external vulnerability scanning, right? Attack surface scanning out of our potential insureds. If we found something in there, like let's say we found Telnet open, which we've actually found Telnet wide open to the internet before, we would ask for evidence that we'd point it out and say, perhaps you close this before we write your policy. And please be so kind as to show us a screenshot where it's no longer accessible to the world. But we very rarely did evidence up front, just because you're dealing with an application that's perhaps 60, 70 pages, which is very odd for me to say. That's my favorite application, and it's odd to admit that you have a favorite cyber insurance application. 60, 70 pages worth of data with just written text responses on top, and then you throw in attachments on top of that. That becomes a scale problem for moving fast through the insurance cycle.
Right. So let's talk for a moment, Steve, about the actual process and the actual kind of cycle of going through the cyber insurance process. From your experience, you know, talk through kind of year to year to year what that process kind of looked like in practice. What was it like? Was it something that you were doing, you started, at a specific time of the year? Was it something where you were doing it constantly? What does that kind of process look like?
Okay. So it's morphed. I'm going to say it's morphed. So I'm going to talk about kind of the transition that I saw. When we were first doing
Okay.
cyber insurance, right? And we were a large company and we had audit requirements. So we had a lot of evidence. We were pretty proud of our security program. It was a relatively large program. We did a lot. So when cyber insurance was coming in initially, and Ed and I have talked about this, right? We had a pretty compelling story to tell. Look, we have identity access management, we have endpoint protection, we have, the other classic components of a good, robust, 10 or 12 control area for cybersecurity. And the insurance companies are just like, wow, it's Levi Strauss. They have good security people. They know what they're talking about, low risk. We're going to give you a great premium for what you want. Okay. And that worked out pretty well for us. And we, in essence, for a couple of years, were able to double our coverage every year because we were able to demonstrate such a strong, compelling story that our rates would go down and we would just take the rates and turn it back into more coverage. Okay. And then ransomware hit. And then the insurance company started losing money. And then what I noticed is then we started to get the vendor security assessments, right? Which was the equivalent of show me that you have good security, and maybe the insurance companies hired a CISO or they talked to some CISOs and they started to say, we won't insure you unless you say yes to you have MFA. We won't insure you unless you say yes to you have asset management for all of your assets. Okay. They moved the pendulum the other way and they started to simply say, now we have questions to lock down the story that you have to be this good. You have to have these controls in place. And that became problematic because anybody that has to answer yes, no to the answer, do you have MFA in your company, okay, has got to say no, because I don't have it ubiquitously deployed and I can't. The business won't accept it. The use cases don't make sense. So now we were losing, right? Because we couldn't in good faith say, do we have MFA ubiquitously answered? And we started to have to tell a different story. And now the insurance companies are saying, well, now we can't insure anybody because we're too strict. And the third stage that I've observed is, so now the rates went up, is that we're much more sensitive with folks like Ed and others to what type of company are you? If you're a Fortune 500, right, and you have a lot of legal and regulatory compliance, and you probably have a pretty big security organization, and you probably have a lot of security controls, okay, the insurance companies love you for the most part. But if you're a SaaS company where, you know, the CISO's responsibility is to demonstrate that the client can trust us with their business and consumer data, but they have much smaller teams. They have many less products. So they have to demonstrate a high level of maturity with much less from the capability perspective. That's a different story to tell versus I'm now a manufacturer of product and security is just a cost of doing business. And I had to get cyber insurance because it was mandated in a contract I signed with one of my customers. And so now the insurance companies and the CISOs are starting to come to grips with this third stage about the story that you tell is as important as the controls that you have for both sides to really understand what the risk is.
Absolutely. And you said a couple of things that were really key. I think, telling that story, that was a theme, Michelle. I know that came up quite a bit, was telling the story of security. So let's talk a little bit, Michelle, about some of the resources, some of the things that the task force really came out of that discussion around. And I think that's where many of the trackers, many of the Excel documents that that organizations will see in the toolkit really came from. It was this idea that you've got to be able to, it's important that, in year one, you're not contradicting something in year two that you said in year one, that you're enhancing it, but that you're also tying everything to show that it's part of a larger strategy um, behind the kind of controls that you've got in place. So talk us through a little bit, and I'm going to show the questionnaire tracker, the security controls tracker, even some of the calendars that we had. I'll show them while you're kind of explaining really how those came about and why this idea of being very well organized but having that consistent story was such an important area of the task force.
Sure. So, like you said, year one is always going to be the hardest one, especially if you're starting from scratch. Ideally, the following years, you can use a lot of the prior year stuff because, especially if you work with those groups all the time, you kind of know what's been changed, even if you don't necessarily work with those groups directly. If all of a sudden MFA pops up, you have that covered, you still kind of see that. So the first year is always going to be the hardest, and then the subsequent years, they should be a lot easier. Those checklists are really nice because I always try to um, prepare as if I'm going to get audited, as if something's going to happen, and they're going to come back and say, hey, you said you had all these things, where are they? So I always try to keep, something like that checklist and those documents on hand just in case. On the flip side of that, then the next year when I have to fill out the surveys and the questionnaires and things again, I can just look and see where those documents are. Do they need to be updated? Do I have everything I need?
Yeah, I mean, as somebody who also owned the cyber insurance renewal process when I was in my last role, times we would get when we got from year one to year two, the first question I would say is, well, how'd we answer that question last year? Like, has anything actually changed, or can we kind of use that same answer or modify it slightly? But um, shifting gears a little bit, Ed, how important is it? And then I'll open this up to the rest of the panel, but how important is it that when you're looking at cyber insurance that you are um, evaluating, your options every year? Is it something like with your auto insurance where there's value in staying with the same company year after year after year after year, or is there real value in looking around and shopping the market every year? How does that evaluation process typically play
Sure.
out?
Yeah, it's an interesting question because uh, business insurance and cyber insurance or in any kind of professional insurance is much different than the auto insurance market, right? I go now to go buy a car insurance policy. I go to Progressive or I go to USAA and buy it directly. You don't do that with business corporate insurance. You go through a broker and they're all licensed, and I should have caveated this at the beginning. I am not a licensed insurance professional, so take everything I say with a grain of salt. Definitely go talk to your broker, but your broker works on your behalf. And so you need to build that relationship with your broker. And so they can help you get the best deal. Maybe they've got preferred rates with certain carriers, or they do a lot of work with a couple of carriers they really like, that sort of thing. There is value, I believe, in renewals, certainly for the carrier. They want to be renewed every year. And so it's in their, again, this is a business. It's in their best interest to help that process along. But you really need to be working with your broker. Your broker can help facilitate a lot of those questions.
And I'll open that to the group, because especially Michelle, because I think we talked a lot about the concept of the broker, and how much, how you might share more with your broker than you would with the end company, end insurance company. But talk a little bit about, the I know you were part of the discussions that we were having around the brokers and the importance of brokers in the task force as well.
Yeah, so our broker did a lot of work for us. Being government, I think sometimes it may be a little bit harder to actually obtain insurance, especially the first couple of years that we started buying the cyber insurance. I think the first year we went out, we had I think we sent out, or the broker sent out, I think between 20 and 25 applications, and we got one company that would agree to cover us. And then as our whole program matured, we were finding it a little bit easier, we were getting a little bit better rates, but yeah, those first couple of years were really, really rough.
Yeah.
I have done
Steve,
evaluations on government entities
yeah.
before, and I get why insurance carriers sometimes want to avoid government entities. They can be a challenge to review. They're disparate. Yes, you think of a single entity like DuPage County or Orange County here in LA, or pick some other large county. Um, there's a lot of parts and pieces to a municipal government. I've done a lot of them over the years, so it can be a challenge.
Yeah, just legacy software,
Yep.
funding, all those
Well,
challenges.
and how much of it, and Michelle, is based on um the default sensitivity of the information that you've got, and the default like criticality of the organization. To me it seems like, from an insurance standpoint, you don't want to go with you don't want to be insuring companies that you're gonna have to pay out on, because they're gonna get hit. You wouldn't, to use the personal analogy, a healthcare insurance company is not going to give you healthcare to somebody who is, doing things that are, or they're going to make it a lot harder to get insurance if you're doing regularly risky things,
So let's
so
let's talk about that for a second, because it's a business decision, right? There is a business model for this. Now, when you talk about it, let's say for a $10 million insurance policy, you don't get a single company that writes you a $10 million insurance policy. You'll get somebody to write, they do it in layers. So you get the first person to write $1 million, right? And that'll be your primary insurance. That's who your basic carriers. But then they build this tower of different layers. So the farther you get away from that bottom level, the less money involved because there's lower risk. But there's a good reason to be on that tower somewhere. Maybe the loss expectancy of the health insurance, I'm just going to pick up numbers here. The health industry sector is maybe $5 million. So if you have a $10 million policy, as long as you're above that number, you're not, the likelihood of getting affected by a payout is lower. So there's a legitimate reason to do some of that stuff.
And our situation too is a little interesting because, probably 65% of our data is publicly accessible. People can
Right.
file a FOIA request and get whatever information they want to have. So it's not necessarily confidential data. People can just request it. But at the same time, the information that, is like the HIPAA data and things like that are critical information is very sensitive. So you kind of have that, not at all confidential to don't ever let this get out.
And Steve, from your perspective, especially coming from the retail, which is one of those that many people think of as unregulated or very low regulated, but is certainly one that, there's a lot of risk. There's a lot of, just other things there. You've got customer data, you've got financial data of, people ordering stuff and what have you. But how has the process played out in your experience and that kind of layering of different levels of risk?
Yeah, and this really hit home when insurance started to get expensive because all the ransomware payouts. Because most people were seeing cyber insurance as the get out of jail free card, right? If I had an incident, it would make me whole. And the answer is it doesn't, right? Cyber insurance, that's why I said it's like flood insurance in Florida. There's a lot of riders associated with it. Cyber insurance is designed to cover the cost of the incident, right, to contain it. It's not designed to cover all the cost of the business continuity and revenue loss. Okay. And a lot of people thought it did both, which means you really need to understand your risk now for what part of the company you're going to protect and what it means to contain the incident, to get the company back to a known good state so that it can continue to do business. But there are other insurance policies that cover the loss of business. Okay. And so now you have to start to appreciate the different types of insurance and coverage, which is for us, then it became, well, $25 million of cyber insurance became prohibitively expensive. So let's go to 10. And of 10, let's only anticipate that we're going to need 5, because by doing that, I'm trying to set the right expectations for what a business outage for the key business processes looks like, as opposed to what does the cost of an incident look like, where I'm just trying to protect the entire company, not the parts of the company that need protection.
Yeah, and you all have brought up, and I definitely want to address this topic because I've spoken with each of you about this at some point, and we've spoken about it before as well. More generally, is this idea that you know this idea of insurance traditionally having been viewed as this get out of jail free card. And I think we've all been in situations where somebody in our respective businesses says, well, but we're not going to implement this security control because there's this, we've got this $5 million policy. If we get ransomed, we'll just tap the insurance policy. um Ed, kind of starting with you and then Michelle and then Steve, talk a little bit about how you address that kind of pushback when you get the, well, but we've got that insurance. It's, like we can always just use that if, and it's cheaper than trying to implement this control.
So the answer is it's never cheaper than trying to implement the control. It's never cheaper. I guarantee that. Much like let's go back to the car insurance analogy, right? You have a deductible. right? If I got to pay out a certain amount of money, you know, for my deductible if I have a car accident or I needed my car repaired or something. You have the same concept in insurance. You have a deductible essentially, but it's called SIR, self-insurance retention, or something along those lines. So you're responsible for the first, let's say, $1 million, and if that's what your policy says, before the insurance kicks in. So do you really want to be down that $1 million? And then all the things that Steve was talking about, sure, insurance will cover some of that, but it's not going to make you completely whole, right? And let's say you've got business interruption insurance for lost revenue. Well, maybe have you looked at your waiting period? How much time do you have to be down? Is it 12 hours, 18 hours before your insurance kicks in? So that's a loss that you have to absorb. So it's never going to be cheaper. Just do the control. Just put the control in place.
Well, and before we move on, are there situations, Ed, and I'm kind of asking a bit of a leading question here, and I know that. So forgive me in advance for asking the leading question, but are there situations where an insurance company will say to you, you did or didn't do something, and as a result, we're not even gonna pay. You don't get anything.
I can't answer that definitively because I didn't work on the claim side. We were walled. Where I was on the underwriting side in my role as head of risk engineering. So I did not get involved in the claim side. We were firewalled off. I suspect that is a thing that could happen, but I don't have any proof of it one way or the other, unfortunately.
So
Dave or Michelle, have you guys heard of situations where somebody did or didn't do some organization did or didn't do something, and as a result, the insurance company said, "Yeah, sorry, you're on your own."
Yes.
Okay.
And the reason why I can say that definitively is look at how the industry has reacted, right? The whole thing I'm talking about is the appreciation that they were saying no because they couldn't cover the costs. And so now you got writers, right? Now you've got to really read it because it's not a $10 million policy period. It's 3 million for ransomware. It's 5 million in the event that it's a data breach. Okay. So they got smarter about limiting the cost. But the thing that I want to bring to everybody's attention is heads up when a company decides to self-insure, right? And I had this conversation multiple times where a company goes, I don't want to pay $1 million for a $10 million policy. The ROI isn't there. So I'll tell you what CFO says, I'm going to take that $1 million and we're going to self-insure. I'm going to put a pot of money together and we'll cover up to $1 million of cyber loss because it'll be cheaper to do it ourselves. And the thing I like about that is, oh, that's easy for the CFO to say, but he doesn't give you any guarantee. He doesn't show you where the money was actually set aside. He basically just accepted the risk and put the liability on you. Be careful about that, right? Get with your corporate counsel, evaluate how that CFO is actually making that money available and what the payout responsibilities are. Don't get fooled by the CFO doing that.
What I hear you saying, Steve, is if you agree to do that, don't be surprised when budget season comes around and you're suddenly $1 million less of your budget is available all of a sudden, and you go, well, wait a sec, I thought you were insuring me. Yeah, we were. Your budget was insuring you.
Just saying.
Yeah. Um, you know, Michelle, I know one of the things that we talked a lot about in the task force was this idea of the things that people don't even realize or they're not looking at that are part of the policies, or the things that they think are in the policy that aren't really. Can you talk a little bit about your experience in some of the things you've seen, some of the things you've experienced where people where there were, and some of the conversation that was had around where there might be gaps? And Ed and Steve would love to get your input as well on where, the gotchas, the things that have caught people off guard.
Sure. I think the understandings of the policy limitations is one of the most dangerous assumptions that people can have. If procurement or, the CEO is saying, hey, we have coverage to notify people in case of a breach, which sounds really good on the surface. But then when you actually take a look at the policy itself, it can be maximum 200 people, something that doesn't even come close to scratching the surface of who you may actually need to notify. So I think there's a lack of understanding about the perceived coverage compared to the actual written coverage. And I think that's really important for everyone to be on the same page about, because the last thing you want to do is be surprised in the middle of an event like that and have to come up with that extra money.
Absolutely. Ed, Steve, anything kind of to add from your perspective of the things that you've seen where you've been like, wow, I didn't even think about that, or I wish others would be thinking about this too.
For me, it is, we spend a lot of time in this business, in the practitioner business, selling cool tech, right? Everybody's trying to, but wants to buy the latest and greatest stuff. And I was on a panel once with Quincy Collins here in LA, who's CISO over at Shepherd Mullen. He brought this point, sort of drove it home for me, and I repeat it everywhere I get. Don't come to me with wanting to do the cool AI stuff when you can't manage the cyber basics, right? And I think that's the thing that it most bothered me when I was looking at applications. It's just the foundational things: asset management, identity management, detection of events, and recoverability. The basic stuff. People just don't have that stuff done yet. And let's forget all the fancy stuff. Let's get back to some basic cyber hygiene. And it becomes obvious when you look at their applications.
Ed, if you're talking about cool tech and you tell me that you have a line in on the Nintendo Switch 2, my 12-year-old would be indebted to you if you told me how to get how to get my hands on one of those, because I know that that's going to be the next cool tech fight that's going to happen. So,
Steve, what do you think?
Yeah.
So I was going to add another case, right, that I've seen, which was
Please.
We're talking about being proactive, that everybody here is going to be involved in the cyber insurance conversation with their company or have something to do. Okay. When you get to small to medium enterprise, or you get to SaaS companies that are young, okay, don't be surprised that the CFO signed a cyber insurance policy because he was told they needed one because they're signing a contract with a Fortune 50 company that says that was written into the contract as an addendum. So ask if you have one, okay? You may not even know if you're the first cybersecurity leader into the company, or if you're working with them in some capacity, because I got to tell you, I've seen it more than once where I come in and I ask that question and they say, we have a policy. And I say, who signed it? And they said, the CFO that was quit 6 months ago. And you read the policy and there's all kinds of commitments around capability and awareness training that in essence, the policy would not be paid out. And yet the company thinks they're doing good. So how do you now bring to the company an appreciation for, we've got to get ourselves legal again relatively quickly to the existing policy that you've written? So don't assume that it's always go forward. Be aware that you may have a retroactive issue.
Absolutely. So as we get towards the end, we're certainly coming up on the end. Michelle, I wanted to give a chance. I'm gonna again share the screen that talks about the tools and the resources. I know, one of the things that obviously we wanted to do on this webinar was both share information, make sure that we have the conversations, and that all of you as attendees or those of you who are viewing this after the fact, that you get to see some of that conversation and that collaboration and that sharing that occurs. What you've seen here in this panel is very similar to what we see in the task forces. It's one of the reasons I love just being a fly on the wall in these task forces, is being able to hear the conversations like what you're hearing today. Share a little bit, Michelle, for us about the tools. I know you've taken a look at them. Steve, and Ed, I know you've taken a look as well. Let us know, share a little bit about your kind of takeaways, the things, Michelle, that you thought were really poignant, and then Ed and Steve, anything that you saw as really valuable as kind of that outside looking in on the tools that came out of this.
Sure. So by far the glossary was one of my favorites, as was the checklist. I am a big checklist fan, which is silly, but I do enjoy them. And
I am
the
too. I was a GRC person. I love checklists too. You're not alone.
and just the actual guide, I think it breaks down. It just kind of organizes what people kind of know about insurance, but this solidifies that they are on the right path. I know for us, you know, having guidelines and being able to stay on the right path is really important. I want to do everything to the most efficient, best of our ability that we can, and resources like this really help out. Even if there's somebody new starts in procurement, you can be like, hey, here's what we're working with. It would just be a good starting point for people coming in as well, because as you know, government has a pretty long tenure. We kind of just stay here until we retire, but sometimes people do cycle out, so we get a little used to having the same people around year after year. But these would be very handy to have, both as a checklist and a reminder for us, but also resources for new people coming in.
And Ed, as somebody who's been on kind of both sides or in some way both sides of the insurance process, how much time, how much energy would an organization who's doing this themselves really have to put in to do this effectively? Is it a very time consuming process, or can it be a very
It can be. It
consuming
absolutely,
process?
absolutely can be a time-consuming process. And for me, to go back to your original sort of question, I
Right.
think the value in the toolkit is it puts some structure around a process that can spiral out of control very, very quickly. In terms of time suck, right? So having, to Michelle's point about a checklist or a step-by-step sort of process, put some structure around an unwieldy process to make it a little more manageable and help reduce the burden of the time vampire that lives in all of us.
Yeah, and I think Michelle and even Kelly Shoup, who said she's a checklist person too, I think we would all agree using checklists are great. Creating them yourself is not always the most fun. We love using them. Putting together the checklist is a whole nother story. It's like, did I get everything? Did I miss something? What did I
That's why you get
forget?
paid the big bucks, Dustin.
Yeah, I know, but at the same time, then I hear from our members, they'll say things, and I'm like, man, how did I not put that on the checklist? Like, putting them together is no fun. Using them is a lot of fun. Steve, anything to add? Anything you want to kind of leave the audience with?
I'll just reiterate, getting cyber insurance should be considered somewhere between getting a SOC 2, Type 2, and getting FedRAMP. Okay? You got to approach it with rigor, because if you don't, right, it can get out of control, like everybody's saying. But it's a negotiation, right, with the auditors. Only in this case, it's cyber insurance. And so what I always say is, say what you do what you say, and have a story that is compelling as to here is what we're doing and why we're doing it and why we think it's appropriate. Because that is how you get through the audits. That puts you in the strongest position to be able to negotiate good rates, because people want to be able to trust you. But to trust you, they have to respect you. To respect you, they have to see that you have a process and that you're speaking from a position of knowledge, not hope.
Absolutely. And I think that that's great. And again, I want to introduce the 20th Resource Toolkit. For those of you who are Accelerator members, this is now available in the member portal. Please log in. If you're interested in learning more, if you don't have access, please feel free to reach out. For those of you who have attended today, get 1 hour of CPE credit. And if you're interested in learning more about the Cyber Risk Collaborative membership, our resource toolkits, please reach out to Tom Ward. When you log off, all of you will get when you exit this meeting, you'll get a survey on your screen. Please take some time. It's only a couple questions. Please fill them out. We really appreciate the feedback. Thank you all for being here. Thank you, Michelle. Thank you to the entire Cyber Insurance Task Force. Thank you, Ed. Thank you, Steve. Thank you all for attending. Hope for those of you who are heading out to San Francisco over the next couple days, have a great time. Be careful, have fun, get some cool swag. I've heard that there's going to be socks galore. So if you need new socks, I hear that there's going to be socks all over the place. And we'll see you again real soon on another one of these webinars and one of these community gatherings. Thank you all for being here.
Thanks, guys.
Thank you.